Yeah, scream.
Even if it does buzz, yell buzz.
Alright. I don't see
Alright. You guys ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
Smooth muscle relaxation is thought to be promoted by this hormone in its namesake block on the myometrium. With CAMP, this hormone promotes the growth of spiral arterioles as part of decidualization. Mifepristone, or RU486, blocks receptors for this hormone. 21-hydroxylase converts this hormone to deoxycorticosterone. IVF regimens usually include luteal phase support with this hormone until enough is made by the placenta to keep the endometrium thick. The corpus luteum secretes E2 and this hormone, which peaks after ovulation and helps maintain the uterine lining.
Progesterone.
Yep. Bonus, many potential participants in this event opted to attend the Liberty Bell Classic instead. For 10 points each, what event suffering from depressed attendance due to an American-led boycott ended up featuring participants who set 36 new world records? Year or host city is acceptable in naming the specific event.
1944 Olympics.
The 1980 Summer Olympics. The U.S. boycotted the 1980 Olympics due to the Soviets invading this country, later ruled by the Taliban.
Afghanistan.
While Soviets denied the impact of these CIA-provided weapons, Afghan gunners reportedly used them to inflict about half of the Soviet aircraft losses in the war at a 79% kill ratio.
Kalashnikovs.
Stinger missiles. 10. 2. Bernard Williams interprets the use of I in this work to refer to the reader, a view he put forth in a book about its author's project of pure inquiry. Notable objections to this work were written by Pierre Gassendi and Thomas Hobbes.
Is that, no, that's a mistake, piece of Westphalia.
Nope. Some of which accused its argument involving the reliability of clear and distinct perceptions of being circular. Its sixth section notes the difference between looking at a triangle and at a 1,000-sided chiliagon to distinguish between imagination and pure intellect, which is also distinguished in its section with the example of a melting piece of wax. This book's author concludes that he must have a self that is being deceived even if an evil demon is deceiving him. For 10 points, name this magnum opus of René Descartes, written after the Discourse on Method.
Critique of pure reason.
Meditations on First Philosophy. Toss-up 3. It's not in the Caucasus, but languages in this country reportedly have a bilabially trilled, voiceless alveolar affricates. A language in this country borrowed all of its personal pronouns from Nyengatu, a lingua franca in one region of this country. A language in this country has been claimed to have a finite limit on sentence length because it only permits recursion to one level of depth. Dan Everett studied a language in this country, although his claims about that language's number system are now hard to verify because its speakers have been taught mathematics and Portuguese. For 10 points, name this South American country home to...
Brazil?
Yep.
It was like that India question earlier. Like everyone was thinking it, but...
Bonus, answer the following about efforts to clean up trash in Africa. This country holds a monthly day of mandatory community service called Umuganda, in which both Hutus and Tutsis mend broken relations from a 1994 genocide to help preserve the cleanliness of cities like Kigali.
Rwanda.
A settlement at the bottom of this city's Mukatam Hills is nicknamed Garbage City and is populated by Zabaline, whose unofficial job is to collect trash. Another settlement in the same area is a necropolis nicknamed City of the Dead.
Nairobi.
Cairo. A more authoritarian cleanup method was employed by this country's ZANU-PF leadership through a forced slum clearing operation called Drive Out the Rubbish, which disastrously dislocated 700,000 people.
Zimbabwe.
Yes. 20. Toss-up 4. This theorem is the m=1 case of the empire problem. P.G. Tate introduced Snarks in his attempt to prove this theorem. This theorem extended Haywood's theorem to the case of genus 0. This theorem would be strengthened by the Hadwiger conjecture, whose k=5 case would eliminate one possible minor. One incorrect proof of this theorem made use of Kempe chains, which nonetheless reduced the problem to the case of minimum degree 5. This theorem's proof was completed in 1976. Yes. As a commander during this war, Bashir Gemayel was elected president of his country during it, but was assassinated a month later. For 10 points each, name this conflict that lasted from 1975 to 1990 and featured the Sabra and Shatila massacre carried out by Maronite forces.
1975 to 1990, that is the Liberian
Answer.
Liberian Civil War?
Lebanese Civil War.
Oh.
In 1982, this country, led by Prime Minister Menachem Begin, invaded Lebanon in Operation Peace for Galilee.
Israel.
This president of Lebanon from 1952 to 1958 was one of the main Lebanese Christian leaders during the Civil War. He founded the National Liberal Party, which used a militia known as the Tigers.
Jeez.
Answer.
Sir.
Camille Chamoun. 10. Toss up 5. The speaker of a poem in this collection tells the addressee that away from the sight of thy face my heart knows no respite. This collection opens with an essay recounting a conversation with a man who claimed that to read one line of this work's author is to forget all the troubles of the world. A poem in this collection describes a place where knowledge is free and where the mind is without fear, while another poem repeats the lines, on the seashore of endless words children meet. This collection, which begins with the line, thou hast made me endless, features an introduction by William Butler Yeats. For 10 points? Yes. This character resides in his castle, Corbinic. 10 points each. Name this mythological character who is wounded in the legs or groin due to an injury from the dolorous stroke. He waits for someone to arrive and heal him, who is apparently supposed to be the heroic Percival or Galahad. Answer. Fisher King. The Fisher King is also the keeper of this object, which according to various Arthurian and Christian mythologies grants eternal life and may have been the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. Answer?
Chalice.
Prompt?
Holy.
Yes. In both Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach's stories of Percival and the Fisher King, this action, broadly speaking, is the cure for the Fisher King's injury, although Percival neglects to do this action.
Looking at him?
Ask the healing question.
Oh, yeah.
10.
Criminal minds.
Toss up 6. Most of the companies owned by Erit, Laub, and Cord were in this industry. In a publicity stunt, a company in this industry made a film where a product was thrown over a Pennsylvania cliff and yet still seemed to work. The Alfred P. Sloan School of Management is named for a longtime leader in this industry. A powerful company in this field published a widely distributed newspaper noted for headlines like, "The International Jew, the World's Problem."
Automobile industry?
Yep. A pianist with this surname played 8 Beethoven sonatas in one concert as part of his touring 7-recital series covering the history of piano music. For 10 points each, give this surname of the Russian pianist Anton, who composed a melody in F and founded St. Petersburg Conservatory. His brother Nikolai co-founded the Moscow Conservatory.
Defer? Rubinstein?
Yes. 12 recitals covering keyboard music from Buxtehude to Shostakovich were given by Vladimir Sofronitsky, a leading interpreter of the Chopinesque character pieces and 10 piano sonatas of this synesthetic Russian composer who used his mystic chord in the poem of Ecstasy. Scriabin. This Italian pianist gave 6 all-Liszt recitals in Berlin in 1911 and was the first to perform all Liszt etudes and Chopin preludes. He transcribed Bach's Chaconne for piano, combined Baroque forms in Fantasia Contrapuntistica, and used a chorus to end his piano concerto.
Liberace.
Answer.
Liberace.
Ferruccio Busoni. 10. Toss up 7. A trip to a country then ruled by a man with this name was the subject of the best-known book of the Marquis de Custine. Diplomat Friedrich Martens and a ruler with this name were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for their work in organizing the Hague Peace Conference. A labor leader and a priest named Georges Gapon led a march against the ruler with his name.
Nicholas.
Yeah. Bonus. In the third act of a play titled after these two characters, they encounter a group of actors on a ship bound for England. For 10 points each, name these two characters from Hamlet who are proclaimed dead at the end of a play by Tom Stoppard.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
In an early scene from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, Rosencrantz comments that unusual forces may be at work when this action unexpectedly produces the same result 92 times in a row.
Flipping a coin.
The second act of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged is a performance of Hamlet. In Act 1, the entire genre of Shakespeare's history plays is dramatized, with most performances using this activity in the depiction.
I don't actually understand what it
Answer.
is. Reading.
Football. 20. Toss-up 8. The only spoken dialogue in a story by this author is when a man twice calls a group of police gentlemen and declares this is a very well-constructed house. The narrator of a story by this author walks into his living companion's room with a shaded lantern on 8 consecutive nights. While at a bar, the narrator of a story by this writer spots an animal with a white birthmark that reminds him of the shape of a gallows. He wrote a story in which the narrator is intensely disturbed by the pale blue vulture eye of an old man, and the story...
Oh.
Yeah. And here's your bonus. This book argues that the ultimate problem of freedom is the cheerful robot who passively accepts his social position. For 10 points each. Name this book that challenged structural functionalism and defined the title concept as the vivid awareness of the relationship between their experience and the wider society.
Utopia.
The Sociological Imagination. C. Wright Mills, the author of The Sociological Imagination, wrote this 1956 book that explores how the dominant leaders of dominant institutions, like the military and industry, make decisions that impact the world.
I don't know.
The Power Elite. Mills also wrote a 1951 book with this title. It analyzed the title type of worker, a middle manager or office worker, contrasted with the blue-collar employee.
White collar.
Yep. 9. The Ministry of Information commissioned Paul Nash to paint one of these things in his defense of Albion. One of these objects titles an 86-foot-long painting whose panels include a young girl seated below a salon dryer and a plate of spaghetti. Ruined parts of one of these objects dominate Andy Warhol's 129 die from the dryer and from the Death and Disaster series. The Castelli Gallery exhibited James Rosenquist's gigantic painting titled For One of These Things. A 1962 issue of All American Man of War inspired a painting in which a man in one of these objects narrates how he pressed the first control and ahead of me rockets blazed through the sky.
A fighter plane?
Yep. Bonus, this object has the numbers 33, 19, and 17 inscribed on it, a so-called secret code that is never explained. Identify this brightly painted object that appears in the story Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Its creepy owner's name, Arnold Friend, is also inscribed on it.
It's not a rain or anything. Rain?
Arnold Friend's car. Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? is a story in which Arnold effectively abducts Connie, is by this prolific author of the Wonderland Quartet of novels.
Line Quartet.
Answer.
Murakami.
Joyce Carol Oates. Oates is a 2-time winner of an award given to outstanding short stories named after this author. He was noted for using twist endings in stories like The Gift of the Magi.
Oh, Henry.
Yeah. Oh, Henry.
10. After meeting with this leader, Jamie Foxx was questioned about an Aragua real estate deal in a letter by Gary Kasparov. This leader proclaimed, "We must keep beating the mafias," in defense of the withdrawal of his country's most valuable banknote in December 2016. Many members of the popular will...
Modi.
Nope.
That's a good guess, though.
Like Leopoldo Lopez, have been arrested by this leader's government. He ordered a blacklist of CNN after the U.S. Treasury accused his vice president, Tarek El Aissami, of drug trafficking. Opponents like Enrique Capriles support a referendum to prematurely end this leader's current term in response to massive food shortages. For 10 points, name the successor of Hugo Chavez and current president of Venezuela.
Maduro.
Yeah. In one appearance, this character is a huntsman who uses the name Zamil. For 10 points each, name this character. In Stravinsky's opera The Rake's Progress, he uses the name Nick Shadow, gives the protagonist a fantastic Baroque machine, and loses to him at cards.
Satan.
Yep. In another operatic appearance, the devil as Samuel joins Caspar in trying to persuade Max to create and use 7 of these magical objects. Answer? Bullets. In this man's opera, The Devil and Kate and Yurka journey to hell. This Czech composer's 9th symphony is subtitled From the New World.
Where
Yep, 20. Score at halftime is 135, Florida, 60, Maryland B.
I have 145.
You have 145?
That's what I have as well.
Okay, I have 20, 15, 45, 65, and then I made a mistake there. So 95. Okay, 145 is correct.
And then 55.
You have 55. Did they neg?
Yeah.
Yeah, they negged on 10.
On 10?
The Maduro question.
Yeah, and who was the neg?
Me.
Okay. Great. So 145, 55. Toss of 11. When asked to name a grandson, a son of this god picked a name as one that has been angered with many. That son was conceived when this god forced himself on the sleeping Chione. That son of this god was known for using his ability to transform livestock to expand his flock at the expense of Sisyphus. This subject of the longest Homeric hymn was granted the service of 3 unreliable soothsayers in exchange for not repeating a scheme that involved reversing a series of footprints. Descent from this god through Autolycus is often cited as a source of Odysseus' cunning, and Apollo got his cattle back from this god in exchange. Yep. In this framework, Tanabe-Sugano diagrams are used to predict electronic transitions and spin states of coordination complexes. For example, each name this theory that models the breaking of degeneracy of metal d orbitals by the electrostatic effect of spherically symmetric, negatively charged ligands. Answer.
That's for
Crystal field theory. The Tanabe-Sugano diagram for an dn tetrahedral complex is similar to that for a d10-n octahedral complex, with the modification that the tetrahedral splitting parameter delta sub t is approximated to be this fraction of the octahedral parameter delta sub o.
1/3.
4/9. In crystal field theory, ligands donate pairs of electrons to metals and are thus bases under this definition of acids and bases. It is more encompassing than either the Bronston-Lowry or Arrhenius definitions.
Lewis.
Yeah. 10. Toss up 12. The difference in this quantity between two systems can be determined using the Bennett acceptance ratio. By using a mean field theory's approach based on the Bogolyubov inequality, this quantity can be computed for complicated systems. Subtracting the product of chemical potential and particle number from this quantity gives the grand potential. At constant temperature and volume, a minimum of this quantity corresponds to thermal equilibrium. This quantity is equal to negative kT times the log of the partition function and is defined as the amount of useful work obtainable from a thermodynamic system at constant volume and temperature. For 10 points, name this thermodynamic potential equal to internal energy minus the product of temperature and entropy, which is named for a German physicist.
Helmholtz.
Yep. Bonus. This artist's fondness for heavily applying red chalk to his drawings led one critic to describe his Madonna and Child with St. John as being as scarlet as a slaughterhouse floor. For 10 points, he identified this artist celebrated as being a faultless painter in a Robert Browning poem. He painted the Madonna of the Harpies and laid the title figures out in a diamond pattern in his Medici Holy Family. Answer.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Andrea del Sarto. This animal-loving saint holds a cross on the left-hand side of Del Sarto's Madonna of the Harpies. A common way to depict him in Renaissance art was to have gold lines tracing directly from Jesus' wounds to his own.
St. Francis of Assisi.
Surprisingly, Del Sarto had never had a major exhibition in the U.S. until 2015, when this New York museum put on such a show. This museum owns Jan Vermeer's Officer and Laughing Girl and Karel Fabritius' The Goldfinch, the subject of a Donna Tartt novel. Answer. The Frick Collection. 10. Toss up 13. A leader of this country proclaimed the necessity of informed observers and news reporting his speech, language, and national identification. That leader of this country ordered his commander of the army to seize power from Mutesa II, inciting the Battle of Mango Hill. The issuance of the Common Man's Charter in this country was part of a socialist doctrine called the Move to the Left, which also involved taking control of 60% of 80 corporations after the Naki-Rubo pronouncement. Operation Thunderbolt took place in this country when Israeli commandos... Yep. Bonus. This book made its author a celebrity sex symbol by describing his relationship with the exotic woman Fayaway. For example, name this 1846 book, whose narrator runs away from a cruel ship's captain and lives among the cannibalistic natives of the Marquesas Islands? Answer.
The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym.
Typee. Typee was a huge success for this author, although he had much less success with later novels such as Billy Budd and Moby Dick.
Melville.
This master-at-arms of the Bella Potent accuses Billy Budd of planning a mutiny against Captain Vere, causing Billy to kill him by punching him in the head. The narrator of Billy Budd describes this character's behavior to natural depravity.
I don't know the Benito Cereno.
John Claggart, 10. 14. One poem of this type includes a version of Aesop's fable about the country mouse and the city mouse in its description of its author's Sabine farm. Another poem of this type describes how its author tries in vain to escape a boar on the Via Sacra. A popular form for these poems was invented by the philosopher Menippus. Horace wrote 2 books of these poems, which are sometimes also called his Sermones. One poem of this type warns Posthumus against marrying women by asking who watches the watchmen. Another poem of this type argues that the population of Rome is pacified by bread and circuses. For 10 points, name these types of poems that attack and ridicule society, which were famously written by Juvenal.
Satire.
Yep. This event took place in a narrow lot on the side of C.S. Fly's photographic studio, for 10 points each. Name this 30-second event that resulted in the deaths of Tom and Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton.
St. Valentine's Day Massacre. St. Valentine's Day Massacre?
Gunfight at the OK Corral. 3 of the participants in the gunfight, Virgil, Morin, and Wyatt, were members of this famous family in Western history.
It's Earp. Okay, Earp.
Late in life, Wyatt Earp moved to Nevada and became involved in a boom surrounding this material, which had earlier helped fuel the creation of Virginia City in modern-day Nevada.
So, silver?
20. Alright, toss up 15. The leading models of this process are collectively known as alpha attractor models. 2 parameters related to the first and second derivative of a scalar potential must be much less than 1 to satisfy the slow roll conditions of this process. In a 2014 video, Chao Lin Kuo delivers news to one of the originators of this theory on his doorstep that data supported this theory to 5 sigma RF.2, but that data collected by Bicep 2 was likely contaminated by dust. After this process, objects more than 1 degree apart were causally disconnected. Paul Steinhardt, Alan Guth, and Andre Linde proposed this theory. This process explains the horizon, flatness, and magnetic monopole problems. For 10 points, name this proposed process that occurred about 10 to the negative 36 seconds after the Big Bang, in which space underwent exponential expansion.
Growth of the universe.
Nope.
Rapid expansion.
Inflation. Toss-up 16. In 2009, a female member of this family appeared on TV and read excerpts from a Minister of Culture's book, The Bad Life, calling him a sex tourist for attending Bangkok's male brothels. Another member of this family controversially noted it was much easier to resist in London in an apparent defense of collaborationists. In 2002, after a member of this family shockingly upset Lionel Jospin to make it to the second round of presidential elections, the line...
maybe Mr. Le Pen.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
This man's homily, Persona Humana, condemned homosexuality. For 10 points each, named the successor to John XXIII, a pope who reaffirmed Orthodox Catholic teachings on birth control in his encyclical Humanae Vitae.
Pius XII.
Paul VI. Paul VI might be best known for reconvening and concluding this council, started by his predecessor in 1962. The most recent ecumenical council, it inaugurated the widespread use of vernacular languages rather than Latin during Mass.
Vatican.
Prompt.
Verse.
Nope. 2.
Yeah.
During Paul VI's papacy, he canonized this woman, the first native-born citizen of the U.S. to be canonized. She founded the Sisters of Charity in Maryland. Answer. Elizabeth Ann Seton. 0. Toss-up 17. In 1919, Percy Grainger recorded a famous piano roll of a piano concerto written by a composer from this country. The first person from this country to become a celebrity throughout Europe was the 19th century violinist Ulla Bull. A composer from this country used its folk music as the basis for piano miniatures like Arietta and March of the Dwarfs.
Norway.
Yep. The missionary father of Clara Wieland basically dies in this manner. In the Émile Zola novel Dr. Pascal, Antoine Macquart dies in this manner that was often used as a signal of alcoholism by 19th century authors, including Charles Dickens in another novel. Answer.
Cirrhosis.
Spontaneous combustion. In the aforementioned Dickens novel Bleak House, this merchant and paper hoarder, who is also Nemo's landlord, dies of spontaneous combustion since he eats nothing but gin.
Smith.
Mr. Crook. This Russian author of Dead Souls used spontaneous combustion to kill off unwanted characters in several of his plot lines.
That's what Google.
Yeah. 18. At the beginning of this book, an enraged man is told by Memu Khan that another person has brought contempt and wrath upon the kingdom. A character in this book exposes an assassination plot by Bigtan and Teresh, which the king only recalls after a dream. An antagonist in this book is caught falling upon the couch where a woman sits and ends up executed on his own gallows. Many scholars note that this is the only book of the Bible to never explicitly mention God. Its protagonist is raised by Mordecai and replaces Vashti in the court.
Esther.
Yeah. Members of this genus grow large yellow or blue-green colonies in tea, CBS sugar. Name this genus of bacteria responsible for cholera. Answer. Vibrio. Vibrio fiscari produces the autoinducer AHL to promote the synthesis of a type of this enzyme. Measuring the activity ratio of the photinous to ranilla forms of this enzyme is the basis of the namesake dual reporter assay.
Emily's.
Luciferase. Bioluminescence is employed in counter-illumination, an active form of this strategy in which an organism blends in with its surroundings. The visual form of crypsis includes disruptive coloration and mimesis.
Mimicry.
Camouflage. 0. Toss up 19. A poem about one of these animals describes how it drops the silver chain of sound after it rises and begins to round. In the first stanza of In Flanders Fields, the sounds of this type of animal are scarce heard amid the guns below. One poem tells this animal thou lovest but ne'er know that love's sad satiety, after comparing it to a high-born maiden in a palace tower and a poet hidden in the light of thought. The final stanza of that poem asks this animal to teach the speaker half the gladness that thy brain must know. Nope. George Meredith wrote a poem about this type of animal ascending. For 10 points. Name this type of songbird addressed as a blithe spirit in a poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Lark.
Yep. Bonus. In a story within this larger collection, a dog transforms into a god while walking up Mount Meru. Name this epic whose 17th book features an amusing story of a man who is blessed by the gods after he turns down a chariot ride because the rider will not let the man's dog ride too. As mentioned above, the dog is actually a god. Mahabharata. In that book of the Mahabharata, this is the god in the chariot. He wields a weapon known as the Vajra, is the king of the Devas according to the Vedas, and once slew the villainous Vritra. Indra. Indra's weapon Vajra is this type of natural phenomenon. It is controlled by Thor in Norse mythology.
Lightning.
Yeah. Last toss-up. This director's last interviews, conducted by Canadian filmmaker Damien Pettigrew, were spliced together into the book and film I'm a Born Liar. In a film by this director, the protagonist crawls under a table and shoots himself before a crowd dances at a rocket launching pad. A man seemingly suffocates in a car before floating up through the car's roof at the start of that film by this man, which is about a director struggling with writer's block, and is titled in reference to the number of previous movies he had directed. In another scene by this director, the actress Sylvia and the gossip journalist Marcello wade into the Trevi Fountain. For 10 points, name this Italian... Yep. Only 12 fossils of this species, originally dubbed Urvogel, are known. For 10 points each. Name this avian genus discovered in 1861 from a single feather. The most famous example, the Berlin specimen, was sold by its discoverer, Jakob Niemeyer, in order to purchase a cow. Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx was discovered in the Solnhofen limestone of this country. It contains the Aachen Formation.
France.
Germany. The Solnhofen limestone contains Escnogomphus and Tharsophlebia, examples of these animals. They are currently in the clade Ondonata, and the Meganeura example had a 2-foot wingspan. dragonfly. No points on that bonus. Final score 265-75.